All right, it is Tuesday, and we've got the first part of Virginia Tech game week. I tell you, the biggest thing that South Carolina needs to do to win this game, and it just so happens to be one of the biggest things they need to do all year, but specifically against Virginia Tech. We talk about that and the talent composite rankings that have been released. South Carolina and Shane Beamer increased their blue chip ratio by 50%. What does that mean? Where does it rank? We talk about all of it and more. Locked On Gamecocks starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I'm your host, Chris Marler. I hope everyone's having a fantastic Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, whenever you are listening to this. We got a great show for you today. And we don't have a sponsor for the first part of the show. We're going to wait till tomorrow. That one angry guy on YouTube comments, he will probably be very pleased about that. But I just want to say thank you to everyone making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Remember, we're a free and available podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Got a great show for you today. Really excited about it. We're going to finally start digging into Virginia Tech a little bit, talk about the keys to victory, and then also one of the biggest keys, I think, that not only happens for South Carolina this week, but also for the entire season. Did a deep dive on the statistics of it. I'm very excited about that. Then we also have the 247 Sports Composite Team Talent Rankings. They come out with every year, and some very interesting numbers with South Carolina, more so really than any other team in the SEC. Not saying they're better or ranked higher, but just from a interesting standpoint of increasing their blue chip ratio and amount of blue chip players on the roster versus some of the rankings and in comparison with the team. So very excited to talk about that as well. Let's get right into it. And the first thing I want to talk about, so it's Virginia Tech week. I debated bringing this up and talking a little bit more about the Russell Faison situation. There was one part of yesterday that I didn't get to, and I'll just briefly go over it. And then we'll get into the actual deep dive of the stats. But one of the things I brought up yesterday very briefly before we got into just being ecstatic about the whole thing was I made the comment that I said, like, South Carolina fans should feel kind of lucky that this happened. We all thought and knew it was the right decision, that they should have done that. Like, I think everyone's on the same page with that. But there was also, I kept saying, depending on the NCAA to make the right decision, or the decision that makes the most sense or logical sense, is never something that we can count on. Case in point, I don't know the exact situation for some of these players, but I will tell you that on the very same day that Faison was ruled eligible, 4 players from West Virginia, they had been ruled ineligible before, I guess, fall camp or maybe earlier on by the NCAA. As you guys know, we've talked about it a bunch, how from state to state, conference to conference, there's all these different rules and laws. Now you got people that are suing, NCAA and getting, stuff thrown out in court and all that kind of stuff, right? So what West Virginia did was decided to kind of go not over the heads of the NCAA, but basically appeal it, have a local court in West Virginia say, no, they can't do that. We're going to make a rule over here or a law over here in the state of West Virginia where they are allowed to play, and it rules them, their decision null and void. Here we go, blah, blah, blah. So NCAA says they're ineligible. West Virginia gets a local court in the state of West Virginia to say, nope, not doing it. They're eligible, blah, blah, blah. The NCAA is now appealing that decision. So for lack of better terms, or long story short, or as I've made it short story long as always, the NCAA is now going out of their way to make sure that their ruling is upheld and those players are ineligible. And what that says to me is 2 things. One, the NCAA is still desperately trying to grab some sort of power that they have lost from this entire situation that's happened over the last couple of years. We've talked about it all the time, how they're kind of like a useless, meaningless, powerless organization now. It feels like this decision shows they're trying to still have some sort of power and show that they still have some sort of governance over everything. That's one. 2, it also tells me that even if this thing would have been turned around like, hey, we're going to sue, we're going to have this overturned, we're going to do this, it doesn't mean it would have worked. So, just listen, point blank period, and as simply as I can put it, the NCAA trying to appeal something that is not going to impact them or affect them and is most likely, like I said, I don't know the ins and outs, but for the betterment of those students, their student athletes, like you're giving the kid from Miami last year like 9 years of college eligibility. Like, I don't know what the case was with these guys, but them going after it, again, appealing that decision shows me that they have time on their hands to do it, right? At the very least. And I'm just glad South Carolina didn't get to that situation with Faison. And that's a really, really, again, big win for this program, for that kid, and for the fans everywhere as well. All right, so getting into today's show, I want to talk about just starting the Virginia Tech week talk, right? It felt like all day there were so many things that happened in my world, and I think in the world of college football. So it was like planning the show. I wanted to originally talk about game week and game prep, like for Virginia Tech stuff, starting out on Monday, and then the Faison stuff happened. So we're going into today, and there's still some other stuff that came up. But I was looking at some of the deep dives and just like, what does this team need to do? What does any young team, a lot of unproven starters, all those things. I've briefly talked about this for Virginia Tech, and I think that a couple of the ones are so obvious. I want to start there of keys to beating Virginia Tech, but also keys to being successful this season. So they kind of go hand in hand, and I'll briefly bring it up with Virginia Tech, but also big picture-wise, they coincide, right? They're parallel. I talked about it all last year, and it sounds stupid and cliche, but the numbers around it paint the picture of why it's so important, okay? The biggest key to victory for South Carolina over Virginia Tech and to be successful this season is not Lenore Sellers. It's not the front seven or anything like that. It's winning the turnover battle. And we've talked a ton over the past couple of years about how good this Clayton White defense has been at forcing turnovers. 88 total in the last 4 years, leads the SEC. We know the numbers. But winning the turnover battle specifically, not just creating a bunch, making sure you're not giving up more. Again, sounds cliche, very big deal. And when you look at the numbers for this program specifically, it's really, really something that stands out. And I think that is like, it cannot be glossed over and cannot be emphasized enough how big of a deal it is to win that. Okay, so let's get into the numbers of this real quick. What's that sound, guys? What's that sound? Uh-oh. The notebook has made an appearance. So you know a deep dive has been done. I was so happy that I found my old notebook because there were so many good little nuggets in it from last year. And I'm going over some of those things. And I remember, because I remember talking about this, how big of a deal it was. And I picked up where we left off from last year. Winning the turnover battle is especially a big deal with Shane Beamer and his bunch, right? And you think about him, he's been in 51 total games since he's been there. In those 51 games, right, South Carolina has finished even or ahead in the turnover battle 31 times. 31 of the 51 times. So right around 60%, a little bit over 60%. Okay? Of those 31 games where they have finished in the positive or even at the turnovers, right, they have gone 24-7 in those games. So basically what I'm saying is when they win the turnover battle, it's happened 31 times out of 51 total games. They've won or finished even in the turnover battle against their opponents. They've won 24 of those 31 games. Now, I saw one of the comments today that it was a review that was left from one of our listeners on the audio side of things, and it made my day because one of the things he brought up was all the quirks and dumb little mistakes that I make during the shows and how he laughed about it, whatever. And I really do appreciate that because you guys know how ADD I am, all that stuff. But one of the things he brought up was me not being able to, or me trying to do too much difficult math during the show right on the fly. So I made sure I wrote it down beforehand. If you have won the turnover battle or finished even or above in 31 of those games, you've won 24 of the 31. You finished 24-7 when even or plus in the turnover battle. That's 77% of your games, or 77% of those games you win. That's a 774 winning percentage when you finish even or above in the turnover margin, right? In the 20 games where they have not, they're 5-15. That's a 250 winning percentage. 250. You want to go through the years of it? He went 2-3 last year, right? 2-3 last year. One of those wins was against Wofford, right? Before that, in 2023, they were 0-5 when they lost the turnover battle. They were 1-4 the year before that. The only win was against Georgia State. And in 2021, his first year, they went 2-3. Those wins were against Vandy and ECU. So you've only had 5 times out of 20 games where you've lost the turnover battle that you came away with a win on the scoreboard and on the field, right? It's imperative. It's imperative. What I should have done was also look at the amount of points they lost by. But I will tell you this. Out of the 5 total wins, 5 wins in those 20 games, that's it. Right? It does not happen at a very large clip. Out of those 5 wins, 3 of them were only by 3 points or less. 3 of them by 3 points or less. And you look at again, it's 77% of those games that you finish even or above. You've won those games. When you finish positive and you just win it outright, right? I think they've had 10 games they finished where it was even in the turnovers with their opponent. They were 9-1 in those games. But if you look at just the games where they finished in the positive and they were plus in the turnover margin, that's 21 games. They're 15-6, right? That's 71.4%. So I look at that and I say, it's a key last year. It's been a key to this Clayton White defense. It's a key again this year. And it has to be. And it's especially has to be against Virginia Tech. We've already gone long. It's my fault. I'm super long-winded. And I dropped the dang notebook and start the entire segment. So before we get into the next part, I'm going to tell you about Virginia Tech and why it's especially important against them. We need to take a brief moment. We got to pay the bills and talk about our other friends real quick over at FanDuel. You guys have heard me talk about this. Listen, today's August 26th. It is the big day. It is the big day. And if you watched episodes the last couple of days, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. Take a flyer on MVP race. Maybe you want to bet on Spencer Rattler to win the MVP. Not a great bet. Maybe it's Travis Kelce because the NFL is going to look out for him now they got engaged with Taylor Swift. Maybe you want to crown your champion in August. Again, Chiefs, probably a pretty good bet after the news today with Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce getting engaged, or parlay your division winner dark horses, okay? Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. We'll be right back with more Locked On Gamecocks after this. All right, we're back. It's been a long day. I don't know if you can hear this glass. Listen, somebody in the comments yesterday also, I was engaged with you guys. You guys are just like the most positive people. It makes me so happy because YouTube can be a hellscape. People can be so mean on there. But somebody was giving me a hard time about, hey, it would be nice to have some Locked On South Carolina stuff or some South Carolina stuff in general in the background. One, I hear you. I responded to it. Listen, getting a house, engagement ring, all that kind of stuff. I got to run stuff by the missus now. It's on the way. And just so we're clear, anything besides this would be nice back here, but we're going to have plenty of South Carolina stuff to put back here. Got a helmet coming and stuff like that. So I'm very excited about that. I also decided, since you guys were giving me crap about it in the comments, to take something to give the attention away from that, which is this drink that I'm having, which is Sauvignon Blanc and jalapenos. I would make fun of me too. I'm fair game, but it's delicious. If you haven't tried it, try it. Anyway, let's get back into the ADD aside. Let's get back into the numbers. And we talked about this in the first part of the show. And again, it's something that's been such a huge deal last year. It's going to be a huge deal this year. And maybe not as big last year, but I also think that it's big every year. And this is the most talented team that South Carolina has had maybe ever. I need to look at those numbers as well, but like maybe ever. And you look at what Beamer has been able to do. This may be a situation where he has enough talent to mask deficiencies, but that's not what you want to do. You want to be a complete team. And part of being a complete team is making sure you are able to win the turnover battle. Forcing turnovers is it's as big of a deal. It's obviously a huge deal. It's one of the ways you win the turnover battle, right? But one of the things that makes me confident about this, because a lot of times these things don't transfer over from year to year. I don't want to jinx it or anything like that, but it's been a pretty damn consistent thing under Clayton White's defenses to be in the top 3 to 5 teams, if not the number 1 team in the SEC every year for total turnovers forced, right? 88 over the last 4 years, like I said, most in the SEC. He had 24 last year, I believe. So he's done a tremendous job of being able to do that, right? Here's the thing I also keep going back to. Yeah, 24 last year and you lost 21. Here's one thing that makes me very like confident with this year. Of the 21 that you lost, you lost 14 fumbles. There's no telling how many total fumbles you had. It's probably a stat somewhere. But if that sounds like a lot, it is, guys. It is. It was tied for the second most in the SEC with Arkansas for fumbles lost. Oklahoma was the worst. They had 15. But that's also not just second worst in the SEC. It's second most in the country. And I just have a feeling that even with the younger group of people, even with new running backs and all that kind of stuff, and all these young freshman receivers, I don't think you're going to have a situation where you lose 14 fumbles this year. I just don't see it happening. A lot of that was on Lenore Sellers. I know he had 11 or 12 total fumbles on the year, and I believe he lost 6 to 7 of those, maybe more. But it led the country. But also, of the 11 or 12 that he lost, 9 of those came in the first 6 games, or that he had. 9 of the 11 or 12 fumbles he had on the season, 9 of those came in the first 6 games. He was able to correct that for most of the second half. So that part was really good. I don't see that being something that carries over this year, right? Like it would shock me if it did. You look at the year before, it's an offense that had 5 total fumbles lost in 2023. You look at the year before that, did have 13 in 2022. And then in 2021, actually, they had 13 then too. I still don't think it's something that's going to keep happening. Maybe it will. Now I look at the numbers. I seriously doubt going from last year with Lenore Sellers to this year, especially with what he did towards the end of the year. I don't see them losing 14 fumbles. It's mainly because of so many of those last year were because of him in the first 6 games. Now, how does this impact or translate or correlate with the Virginia Tech game specifically? So Virginia Tech has been pretty good at protecting the football and also not just forcing turnovers, but also limiting their turnovers. Where it stands out the most, they had 25 total turnovers gained last year. So they finished with 1 more than South Carolina, which is, obviously impressive. That was good for 13th in the entire country. South Carolina obviously was tied for 17th behind them. But only 1 more. They had 15 interceptions on the year. So Lenore's has to be careful there. The other part of it is they didn't have a ton of turnovers. They had 17 total on the year, and that was good for 54th in the country. Not great, also not the worst. You're in the top half of the country. And again, since your margin was so high at +8, you were able to finish top 25 in the country in that category, which even though South Carolina was so good at forcing turnovers, they were still just 46th in the country at turnover margin at just +3. So you need to make sure you are able to not throw interceptions. I think one big thing for South Carolina, you saw it in last year's opener. One of the things that won that game, you were +3 turnovers against Old Dominion, and that was a miserable game. They came very, very close to losing, right? But turnovers is what pretty much solidified it. When you were able to get Dylan Stewart to have that play where he blew up I think it was the mesh concept, and inside the 10-yard line, give the ball back to South Carolina, they were able to punch it in and score. Stuff like that, that's obviously huge. Like flipping the field, being able to work in a short field offensively, all of those things. I just have a feeling that ball security will be a much, I don't want to say easier, because football is football and things happen, and you still have a lot of young players on this team. But it does feel like a player that's 25 playing running back, and then a guy like Lenore Sellers, who just statistically speaking, we saw turn a corner and fix the problems that he had with turnovers last year. I feel like those things are kind of going to be maybe not remedied completely, but much closer to what we saw over the last 6 games versus the first 6. The other thing too, and I'll give you a hint on this. I think obviously the part about the front 7, front 6, however you want to put it, because it's a nickel flex defense where they're in a 3-3-5 or a 4-2-5 defense. All of that's fine. I will tell you that, it does feel like, what's the best way to put this? It does feel like obviously being able to stop the run is huge. Last year against LSU, which is one of the worst rushing offenses in the country, you let them run for over 4 yards a carry. In your 3 losses in the regular season, you gave up 9 of like what was the total here? I'll just pull it up real quick. I think it was like 9 of their total rushing touchdowns on the year in those. Yeah, sorry, here we go. 9 of their 16 rushing touchdowns came in those 3 games. LSU, Bama, and Ole Miss. All 3 of those teams had 3 rushing touchdowns apiece. Then the only other teams before bowl season, or really you can even include Illinois, the other 3 teams that had double digit rushing scores against you in a single game. Missouri had 2, Clemson had 2. Obviously, you won those games. You won them by a combined 7 points on last minute drives. So you were kind of flirting with disaster there. And then Illinois had 2, and they obviously won that game. So obviously, keeping teams out of the end zone is a big deal, but keeping teams out of the end zone and not letting them run the ball down your throat into the end zone is something that at least last year was a really big deal. It's kind of a no-fly zone in the secondary there. I kind of expect that to be the same thing again with how good the defense is going to be. I think that's the strongest unit on the entire team is the secondary. So, yeah, you don't want to get gashed for 4 yards of carry like you did against LSU, but you also want to make sure you're not having teams get down in the red zone and then pound the football into the end zone and down your throat for rushing scores, because that was something that was detrimental to you all last year as well. So those are my biggest takeaways. We're going to get into the other stuff. I think the other big thing, man, is just Lenore's getting off to a strong start, right? So that, like the third key to victory, it sounds so obvious, but Lenore's just getting off to a strong start. I would love those young receivers to have some good days, get their feet wet a little bit, make some big plays. That's all great. What I want to see more than anything, I would love to see Mike Shula spread the football around a little bit. One of my favorite things about how good Georgia was offensively, everyone knew how good the defense was in 2021, 2022. One of the things they did better than anyone, you saw it in 2021 when they were able to beat Alabama at the end of the season. Alabama was pretty banged up with injuries that year. And that room was very talented at the top, not as deep talent-wise as this South Carolina team or this South Carolina receiver room probably. But you saw it even when they weren't, then they didn't lose their top 2 receivers, where you were having at most 5 different receivers catch a pass, including the running backs in every game, like towards the end of the season. Georgia had done a better job of anyone else in the country at spreading the ball around to multiple players. I mean, you had, I believe, the last 7 or 8 games of that season, 2021, they had a minimum 8 guys catch at least 1 pass. And that kind of stuff is really big because you are distributing the football to a lot of talent. You got to keep a lot of people happy, right? And it's not something you want to base the offense off or on. I mean, where you're like, well, we got to make sure we get this freshman this many touches and we don't want them to transfer. No, of course not. But you do want to make sure you're in a situation where you're keeping people fed, you're keeping defense on your toes, and you're not having anyone be able to key in on one guy because you're able to spread the ball so efficiently and effectively around the offense. I think, listen, I don't know how he did it at Carolina. It's something we could probably get into. We probably won't, to be honest, because we're not this week at least. But I feel like there's probably no better person to have that communicated with or to have be on the same page with as an offensive coordinator than Mike Shula. I mean, like 40 years of experience, I'm sure he knows the importance of that. And also making sure there's a balance on offense, rushing the football and obviously throwing the football. So I think we're in safe hands there. I'm excited. I'm excited. It's this week. And those are my 3 keys to victory as of today on Tuesday or Wednesday morning, whenever you're watching this. It's going to be very, very important. So I think that they're going to be really, really effective at all 3 of those phases. And it just feels like now, especially with the phase on news, it feels like very much like those guys are probably amped up just like we are. Let's go to a quick commercial break. I know that we've gone way too long. As always, we should have known better. Before we do, I want to give a quick little reminder to you guys about our listener survey. I brought it up yesterday. There's still a couple days left, right? But the listener survey part of it, there is something we're trying to do just to get better as a, I almost said program, but as a company with Locked On is our listener survey. We have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Okay, so go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be automatically entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thank you for helping us out. Also, want to give a quick shout out to my favorite ad read, Rugy It Ready. Let's talk about it, guys. Listen, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugy It Ready. Rugy It Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugy It's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast on average in 15 minutes. The effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugy It might be the answer, with over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to rugyit.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get 15% off today. That's rugyit.com/lockedoncollege and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 15% off. Remember, individual results may vary with a prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugy It website for full safety information. And when we come back, we're going to close out today's show with a look at the composite rankings from 247 Sports and where South Carolina landed, because it's very, very impressive and should make all of us very confident going to the year. All right, so let's close out today's show with this. One, just record with our buddy Chris Gordy, who you guys have met before, obviously been on the show. Also the host of Locked On NCC. Give it a listen. After you give this one a listen, he does a great job. One of my very good friends in real life, not just at work, and appreciate all he does. He is waiting for me to go record a show together, so I'm going to keep this part brief, and we're going to touch on it in a bigger expanded role or expanded look tomorrow, and I can dive into some more of the numbers. Here's what I do want to go over real quick. The 247 Sports composite ranking. There's been stuff that has come out where what is his name? How do I always forget this? Bud Elliott with 247 Sports and CBS Sports does this thing every year. He came up with this system where basically you look at the updated team talent composite rankings, right? And this is the 8th straight year they have done this, and the top 3 have all been the same. It doesn't mean the team with the most talent has won the national championship. It actually, since 2017, the team with the most talent has not won the national championship, mainly because it's been Alabama, except for in 2017. 2020, it was Georgia. But basically, you look at the total number of blue chip commits, players on your roster. And blue chip means 4 or 5 stars out of high school. It is specifically out of high school, which is something that I always love to look at South Carolina about. And I think is kind of looked, when you look at teams like Alabama, especially with DeBoer, the way they're trending. I like looking at South Carolina's numbers, even though they're not nearly as much of blue chip players. Whereas I look at it and say, sure, they don't have as much, but they've been pretty damn good with 3 stars. I mean, they just put 3 in the top 50 of the NFL draft last year, but it is something that is only your ratings out of high school. So, for instance, Faison, 2-star recruit out of junior college, 4-star kid out of the portal, that would count as a 2-star in this system. So it's a kind of a flawed thing, but nonetheless, it's something that has been pretty consistent when looking at teams over a certain number or percentage of blue chip players winning the national championship or being in the playoff. That part's been consistent, and South Carolina is right around that line. Now, South Carolina, in the 5 years that Beamer has gotten here, let's start here. So this is what I think is most interesting out of this is you look at the way that this is all playing out now in the portal era, NIL era, all that kind of stuff, and just the little bit more even distribution of talent. Alabama under Saban, Alabama's had the number 1 portal class, composite talent ranking for 5 straight years, 2021 through this year. They're number 1 again, 2025. I didn't look past 2020. I know they had it in 2017. I would imagine they did in 2018. And it doesn't translate necessarily to them winning the national championship. Obviously, as we've seen, they haven't won one since 2020. But in the last 4 years, when Saban was there, he had 75, then 74. DeBoer's first year, he had 67. And now this year, you still lead the country, but you have 63. And that's total combined 4- and 5-star players, total blue chip players. So 75, 74, 67, 63. Still number one, but trending down. South Carolina in the 5 years under Beamer, I thought this was very, very interesting. His first year, they had 23. Second year, they had 24. Again, total 4- and 5-star players. Second year, they had 24. Third year, they had 26. So not a crazy change. Last year, they had 30. Okay. This year, they have 39. Now, from last year alone, that's a jump in 30%. You have 9 more. You have 39 this year. You had 30 last year. That's a 30% increase from last year. From 2 years ago, or at your highest when he had his first 3 years, 39 versus the 26 you had in 2022, which, by the way, pretty good into the season 2022. The 39 you had, that means you've had a 50% increase. Now, what's interesting about this with South Carolina specifically is that puts them 18th in the country. It puts them ahead of teams like Ole Miss, Arkansas, I think Oklahoma, maybe not Oklahoma, but Arkansas, Ole Miss, some other teams that have recruited pretty well and been around you, especially Ole Miss. You think about that, but you rank ahead of them. You're right behind Southern Cal. Okay. The other part of that's interesting is that as this has gotten better, you've moved up in the national rankings, right? But from where you were in 2021 through 2023, you were 8th in the SEC all 3 of those years, 8th. So you were right outside the top half of the SEC in total blue chip players. Then you increased your number and got to 30 in year 4. You dropped to 12th. Then you got to 39, right? Increase the number again by a ton. You're only at 10. So what I'm seeing here is that the influx of talent is great for South Carolina, and we know what Beamer and the staff can do with less talent. So I'm not worried about. I'm even more excited what they can do with more talent. But it's also at a time with the NIL era, especially, you're seeing more and more players around the SEC go to these bigger schools and have like a even more inflated talent on those rosters. All right, that is all for today's episode. Gordy is going to kill me if I don't get over there and record with him. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you tomorrow. And until then, go Cox.